Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for the view from the opposition, and it's the big one, Sunderland versus Newcastle United in the third round of the FA Cup. Of course, it takes place at the Stadium of Light on Saturday at 12:45 kickoff. I'm joined by my colleague James Hunter, who has covered Sunderland since 1999. Let's welcome him into the studio. James, Happy New Year. I hope you've had a good one. Are you looking
Happy New
forward?
Year to you, Andrew. Yes.
Thank you very much. Are you looking forward to this weekend?
Yeah. It's going to be quite interesting. I was just totting up there. I didn't realise that this will be my 27th time we're derby covering, which is just a staggering number. I'm amazed it's that many.
That is quite the number, isn't it? And you, given the record, I say of late, I mean, the last one was 2016, but Sunderland do come into this with a really good record in this fixture, which, given Newcastle's form of late, probably doesn't help the nerves at all. What are the nerves? What is the feeling, do you think, inside the Sunderland camp at the moment? Because obviously with the change of manager, he's not been in too long. What was it? I think his first game was the 18th of December. So not long at all. What is the feeling within the camp about this game? Because this is a big game to come upon the horizon that quickly for a new manager, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's a very eagerly anticipated game. I think by people on Wayside. I think there's two distinct sides to it. There's certainly the view from within the dressing room, and then of course there's the view on the terraces from the fans. Obviously, fans have been here before. They remember that sequence of games that you've alluded to. In more recent times. Dating back to 2011. Whereas the players, none of them have been involved in derby games or certainly in time we're derby games before. And nor has Michael Beale. They've possibly been involved in other derbies elsewhere, but nothing quite like the atmosphere that's going to greet them at the Stadium of Light on Saturday lunchtime.
You mentioned Michael Beale's kind of history there. Obviously, he was involved with Rangers in the old firm, and that is a ferocious derby. The atmosphere is always feisty there. I mean, the recent one, Rangers weren't allowed into the Celtic ground. Do you think experiencing a derby like that will set them in good stead for what is to come on Saturday, or are they just each derby is different? So is as ferocious as that one is up in Scotland? This is a totally different ball game, so to speak.
I think if you've been involved in the old firm games, you've experienced a big derby. You've seen the big derby atmosphere. I think that probably there's a natural inclination, particularly from someone from outside the area like Michael, to think, well, this is going to be a big derby, but it won't be anything like Rangers Celtic. It will be, it'll be a big derby by its own standards, but it won't be like Rangers and Celtic. And if that is the perception, I think that he'll quickly realise that that's not the case. I think everybody that's attended a derby fixture up here, either on Wayside or on Tyneside, knows that the atmosphere is the equal of any derby fixture anywhere. It'll be every bit as intense as an old firm game or a Barcelona, Real Madrid, or whatever derby game you care to mention, anywhere. So I think that it will help him to have had that experience elsewhere. The big question is how it will affect the players themselves. Obviously, Sunderland have got a very young team, so they haven't got the experience to be frightened of an occasion like this. I don't know off the top of my head whether there are any players in the Newcastle team that were still playing in 2016. I can't remember. You'll know that better than me. But certainly none of the Sunderland team were here last time out. So it's a complete new experience for them.
Maybe Jamal Lascelles and Paul Dummett, perhaps, I would think, were probably the only two still around. But it's interesting that you mentioned that managers can't underestimate the feeling when it comes to this fixture. Your first time weird derby, a weird time derby for yourself, was that the Ruud Gullit one when he did indeed underestimate what it meant to the region?
It was, yeah. It was, it was a seismic occasion, wasn't it? On both sides of the divide. Obviously, it was the one in pouring rain at St James's Park. Alan Shearer on the bench for Newcastle. I think it was Ruud Gullit's last game in charge, if I remember rightly. I think he departed either the next day or 2 days after. Can't just remember which. And from Sunderland's point of view, Sunderland had just been promoted back to the Premier League then. and it was very much a case of them, giving Newcastle a bloody nose. I think it was August, despite the downpour. It was only in August, and it was a very early sort of statement of intent from Sunderland. So it did have big effects on both sides of the divide. But that was the first one that I covered.
Yeah, there were the infamous quotes from Hullett in the build-up where he played down the feeling of the derby. He referenced the Milan derby and people working in the same city and why that was more of a derby than this one. And that obviously backfired hugely when Newcastle lost that game. How then does Michael Beale make sure, James, that he doesn't fall into the same trap, that he doesn't underestimate the feeling of this fixture?
That's a very good question, and the reason why I say it's a very good question is because Michael Beale is so new here at Sunderland. Nobody knows him particularly well yet. We don't know him as a character. I've only seen him in a handful of press conferences and press briefings so far. So I don't have a great idea of exactly how he will approach this. I'm due to see him later today. We're talking on Wednesday. I'm due to see him later today, so I might have a better flavour of it then. But I think he will know from that Old Firm fixture that you can't underestimate these derby fixtures, that they are all important to fans. I mean, I know, of course, both Newcastle and Sunderland, the rational side of your brain will tell you as a Newcastle or a Sunderland fan that what's important is the Premier League in Newcastle's case and competing for Europe, European qualification, whereas for Sunderland it's trying to win promotion by hook or by crook to the Premier League in the Championship. But football isn't a rational business, and we all know that the derby game, this game, will take centre stage, and at least in the short term, this will be the game that everybody is consumed by, and all thoughts of European qualification, promotion, whatever else it might be, is on the back burner until this is well in the rearview mirror. Of course, come the end of the season, the derby will be, as I say, firmly in the rearview mirror. People will have moved on to other things, but for now, at least, it's absolutely pivotal in both teams' seasons. As you say, Newcastle coming into this game on the back of a poor run in the Premier League, and a derby defeat would be, a real kick in the teeth. From Sunderland's point of view, Sunderland are underdogs coming into this fixture. They're not expected to be a top half Premier League team. So in that sense, there's not that kind of pressure on them. But of course, there's a pressure because of the opposition and the fact that they have to give a good account of themselves. And they do feel that, given the struggles that Newcastle have had most recently, this is a good time to play Newcastle. But that doesn't mean any more than that, does it? As we all know, these games rarely go according to plan or according to expectation.
Do you think the fact that no one expects Sunderland to pick up victory on Saturday, does that play into their hands slightly more and maybe puts pressure on Newcastle because they are expected to be the ones who win?
Well, I think it's certainly true that Newcastle will be the ones that are expected to win. They will come into it as the favourites, and they will have that additional pressure on them. But as I say, Sunderland know that derby games are very difficult to judge. They're very difficult to get a handle on because all the usual rules go out of the window as far as where the pressure is, and we might say, well, Newcastle are the Premier League team and therefore they're the favourites. But on the other hand, Sunderland are at home. And so, they will have that expectation from their fans. They won't be able to just sit back and try to absorb pressure. And also, it's a cup tie. There's nothing to be gained from playing for a draw, really. Sunderland might say, well, there's there's some kind of moral victory in taking a Premier League team to a replay, but not when it comes to a derby, and not when it comes to this, because there's going to have to be a winner one way or another in the tie, whether it's Saturday or in any replay.
I guess the thing that really counts in these sort of games is the fight and the desire, isn't it? It's about who wants it more. The form, and to a certain degree, the ability of the players kind of goes out the window. It's about who's going to go that extra yard. It's about who's going to go into that challenge with a bit more firmness. Now, against Nottingham Forest and against Luton, that was lacking from Newcastle. It was two abysmal displays from Newcastle, and the most worrying thing was that lack of fight. Do Sunderland have that? Can Sunderland match it if Newcastle bring it to the table on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, Sunderland's strength is not the physical, powerful, aggressive side of the game. Sunderland are a very technical team. They're a very good passing team. They're a very good, quite creative team. Albeit they've had trouble in recent times in actually putting away chances. They do, they are quite creative in the final third with Jack Clarke and I don't know whether he'll be fit on Saturday, but Patrick Roberts normally and Alex Pritchard, of course, players such as those. When it comes to the aggression and desire, Sunderland and Newcastle, they both have to show that. That's an absolute minimum for both teams in a derby game. You can't if you don't show those basic qualities, then you're on a hiding to nothing, and fans won't accept it. They will be on your case, and rightly so, because if you don't have that kind of desire and will to win in a derby game, then when are you going to show it?
Very true. And we mentioned there the form of Newcastle. It's not been great of late. Many games they've lost, and their away record is awful. Their FA Cup record is even worse as well. Although looking back at Sunderland's FA Cup record, it's not too great either. But do you think Michael Beale will look at Newcastle's recent performances and see where they can be targeted and where they can be hit, i.e. the left side of Newcastle, if it's Dan Burn, that seems to be where the oppositions have been targeting recently. And then in midfield, when Newcastle go forward, they are awful on the transition. They can't stop teams from countering. Does that appeal to Michael Beale in maybe his approach to Saturday, do you think?
I think that will be something that he's looked at. I mean, I have to say that in recent times, Sunderland have seemed, to my eyes, to have given a greater emphasis to preparation than any other time in my nearly quarter of a century covering the club. It's now a huge part of what they do. The amount of background research and what have you that goes on ahead of every game. I think, in common with all teams, I think all teams pay much more attention to what their opponents do than they did 15, 20 years ago. But it will have been something that's come to Michael Beale's attention. It will be something that he's looked at and concentrated on. And I think that's what Sunderland will have to do. They'll have to look at the areas where they can hurt Newcastle. That they can't turn it into a straight fight, I don't think, because obviously Newcastle have got Premier League quality players. And Sunderland do have some Premier League quality players, but not a full team full of them, or else they'd be in the Premier League. But yeah, so there's going to have to be a case of trying to find a way. It was actually a phrase that Tony Mowbray was a big fan of, having to find a way. If you're not able to compete on perfectly equal terms, then you have to find a way to bridge the gap, and that will be what Michael Beale has to do.
So
that could be increased desire. Sometimes you can play a better team than you, but you show more physical desire. You run harder, you run faster. You put in more challenges. You can do it tactically. You can do it in team shape. There are various different ways, but that you have to find a way of bridging the gap between the sides.
Given Beale's been in the job such a short space of time, have you seen enough to kind of say this is his approach on the pitch? I.e., as you mentioned just before, they seem to be passing the ball about a lot more, a bit better. But then I guess your answer to that question might be slightly skewed by the fact that it is a derby and it's a different kind of a approach maybe needed against a quality Premier League side.
I don't think that we've seen much of, if you like, the Michael Beale way, and there's very good reason for that. It's because the busy Christmas period is, has come 4 games in 10 days, was it something like that? I think. So Michael Beale had, I think, 3 days to work with the players when he first came in. Then you have the 4 games in 10 days over Christmas. So there's been very little time for him to work on the training ground with the players. So to a large degree, he's been picking up the reins from where Tony Mowbray left off. And that's not a bad thing because, don't forget, Tony Mowbray was sacked, but he wasn't sacked because of bad results. He wasn't sacked because performances were bad. He wasn't sacked because, things were going drastically wrong. He was sacked for other reasons. So it's not as though Michael Beale came into a failing team and a failing football club. He came into a pretty good situation, a very good situation, and so there hasn't been a lot that needed changing. It's not like, I don't know, for sake of argument, somebody comes into Birmingham to replace Wayne Rooney, they're going to have to make big changes because everything's going wrong there. That's not the case at Sunderland when Michael Beale came in. He has been able to let things tick along, and he will get the chance to put his stamp on the team. But that will come, in the coming weeks and months ahead. But also, I think that Sunderland's model, to use the phrase that they like to use within the club, they've picked a coach that fits the current situation, someone that does fit in. They're not looking for a radical change. They were looking for someone that could make an incremental improvement.
Now, obviously, the reception Michael Beale got in his first game, that defeat to Coventry, chance for Tony Mowbray, it wasn't a good atmosphere. Obviously, the results have improved since then, 2 wins and a draw. Has it improved so much that if Sunderland lose on Saturday, yes, it'll be disappointing. Yes, of course, you don't want to lose the game, but it won't impact him too much in the long term. He's not going to suddenly find himself under a lot of pressure from the fans for losing the derby, as much as it will be disappointing to do so.
Yeah, so I think it won't be a defining game for Michael Beale. I think that that said, there are ways to lose a derby game. If you lose by the odd goal or 1-0 or 2-0, that's one thing. When you're in different divisions like Sunderland and Newcastle are, I think, of course, if you suffer an embarrassing defeat, if you suffer a heavy defeat at home, well, that's more difficult to come back from. But it won't be a defining moment because it's so early in his reign, because there's a division between the two teams, because it's in the cup. It's all these are extra factors to consider. So yeah, it doesn't have that kind of pressure on. I think possibly we spoke about pressure a bit earlier on. I think in many ways it's Eddie Howe that will find himself in that situation, given the run of results that he's in. Even though, as I'm sure you'd agree, Eddie Howe's done a wonderful job at Newcastle in his time there, and the changes that he's brought and the way that he's lifted the club. We know that in football you only need a few results, and suddenly things change very quickly on you. The weather changes, particularly with the ambition that Newcastle have and where they want to be. It's an extra additional pressure. Michael Beale doesn't have that pressure. This is a game that obviously Sunderland want to win. Obviously, defeat is I won't say a nightmare or a disaster. Defeat is very, very heavily felt by any team in a derby, but it won't knock Sunderland out of their overall arc, which is to try and get back towards the Premier League.
I mean, you mentioned there that the Eddie Howe pressure potentially. It feels like this fixture is a bit like the Carabao Cup final last season. It's come at the total wrong time because Newcastle's forms dropped off so badly, and Newcastle went on to lose that game. I think if it had come a bit earlier in the season, and obviously the FA Cup was always in January, but I think people get my point. You're feeling a little more confident about this game, but given the results of late and the games have lost their away records, I think there was a lot of nerves on Tyne's side. You mentioned there, James, the owners. I mean, this is the first derby for both sets of owners because, of course, both clubs have gone through change of ownership. What do you think the owners at Sunderland are feeling about this game?
That's a good question. I think obviously, Kirill Louis-Dreyfus being the owner at Sunderland now, and Juan Sartori, the Uruguayan businessman. This is sort of uncharted territory for them. Again, they both come to it from a different background. The Louis-Dreyfus family are a very big name in French football through Kirill's father and his time at Marseille. So he understands what derbies are all about. In a French context, I think probably Marseille and PSG. There's a pretty fierce rivalry there, but I think we'd all agree that it would pale in comparison to what we'll see on Saturday and in previous derby games between Newcastle and Sunderland. They know that derby games are incredibly important fixtures. It dictates fans' mood, and like I say, they're in a situation where a defeat in the derby is always unwelcome. It's not unforgivable in Sunderland's situation, given the fact that there's a division between the two sides. As long as they play the game the right way, as long as the fans can see that their team have left absolutely nothing out on the pitch, that everything is in there. And Sunderland do feel that they've got a chance in this game. The FA Cup is famous for shocks. It's third round day. Sunderland are the underdog. They've got a great record against Newcastle in recent times. They can even look back. I mean, even I wasn't covering the club last time they met in the FA Cup. I mean, it was March 1956. You'd have to be probably 75 going on 80 if you remember that game. But yes, Sunderland won the last time the two sides met in the FA Cup. Newcastle were the holders back then. So funny things can happen in the FA Cup. It'll be very interesting to see how this one works out at the weekend.
Certainly will be, and both owners will want to win the first derby of their era. We mentioned there the records: Sunderland unbeaten in the last 9 derbies. Of course, the last one was 2016, which was a draw. They did win. I think it's 5 in a row, isn't it? Newcastle last won
six in a row.
Sorry, I can't read my writing. 6 in a row. Newcastle last won.
It's just wishful thinking, actually, Andrew. I think that's just wishful thinking.
Yeah, just letting the listeners feel a little bit better about the record. Newcastle last won in 2011, but then the FA Cup records, as I've mentioned there, you go back to 2013-14. That was when Sunderland made it to the 6th round of the FA Cup. So, since then, it's not been a good record for them. And equally for Newcastle, they made it to the quarterfinal in 2019-20. But then you've got to go back to 2005, 2006 to see them in the 6th round. And since then, it's been pretty much the 3rd and 4th round. The 4th round, if they're lucky, that they've gone out in. So, yeah, the records aren't great in the FA Cup. So that'll play its part. Let's talk about the atmosphere, James, that we're going to expect on Saturday, because I've seen on social media, and you'll be able to tell me if this is kind of the feeling away from the good old internet. Obviously, Newcastle are taking quite a few thousand to the Stadium of Light, and that's meant that some Sunderland fans have been displaced. That hasn't gone down particularly well, like I say, on Twitter. Is that the feeling on the ground as well? And what kind of impact does that have going into this game, do you think?
I don't know what kind of impact it will have on this game. I think it will probably be set to one side for the duration of the match, but it's certainly gone down like a lead balloon, as you'd expect. And on Wearside, the actual fact of home fans being displaced at the Coventry game, which was Michael Beals' first game in charge, there were banners at both ends of the ground protesting about the number of seats. On maybe not so much, well, partly the number, but more so the fact that home fans were being displaced. Saying that the home end or one of the home ends was being handed over, and that the club should be ashamed of that, and also one relating to the price of corporate tickets for the revenue that would bring in. So yeah, it's gone down like a lead balloon. There's a lot of very unhappy Sunderland fans, a lot of unhappy Sunderland fans that I know that have been moved, season ticket holders, as a result of this. I understand why it's been done. It's been done for safety reasons, of course. It's all right having away fans up in the very far top corner of the North Stand. But there's been a constant problem with other teams coming to the Stadium of Light with objects being thrown from the top tier onto the Sunderland fans down below. Clearly, the safety people thought that was, an unacceptable risk, and it was safer to have, away fans on both the top and bottom tier at that end. And also, of course, under the FA Cup rules, Newcastle were entitled to ask for more tickets than for a league game, so that had to be accommodated too. But yes, it's certainly a decision that Sunderland fans are not happy with, and it created the atmosphere in that Coventry game before Christmas, which was Michael Beals' first game in charge. It all, along with a 3-0 defeat in that match, that all led to a pretty sour atmosphere that day. It wasn't much of a welcome for Michael Beale. It could have, obviously, if Sunderland had beaten Coventry, it would have, it would have been put to one side. But in the context of the 3-0 home defeat with a new manager, having just parted company with a popular previous manager in Tony Mowbray, Sunderland fans were not happy.
Do you think that atmosphere? I mean, obviously, you've said there that you don't think it'll impact the game. I mean, I think what it'll do is it'll probably make for an even better atmosphere in many ways, because you've got more fans from the opposition in. I mean, you watched that Celtic Rangers game over the weekend. Obviously, it was all Celtic, and you understand the reasons why the away fans weren't allowed in. I think there was a disagreement over ticketing and what have you, but it just removes some sort of element from a derby. So maybe having a few more Newcastle United fans in will ramp the atmosphere up even more. But I suspect, James, you're expecting the home fans to give everything on Saturday.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, it's a sold out game. It's the first derby in nearly 8 years, so it's a huge attraction. It's going to be a really wild and raucous occasion, and let's hope that everybody keeps their heads and behaves themselves. Enjoy yourselves, have a good time, enjoy the game, but let's not do anything daft. But yeah, it's going to be some occasion, and it's one that I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, I mean, Newcastle United fans are getting the coach about 8 o'clock, so they're going to have to be in the stadium light for a wee while before they see any action. Let's just talk about the key player for Sunderland, James. And if you're sitting down with Eddie Howe and you're going through the secrets of Sunderland, who is the one player you're saying to Eddie Howe you're going to have to keep him quiet on Saturday?
If you were going to pick out one individual player, there are probably 2 or 3 that you could look at, but the obvious choice is going to be Jack Clarke on the left wing. He's Sunderland's star man this season. He's been he was tracked by Premier League teams in the summer. He'll be no doubt the subject of interest again this month. He's been absolutely outstanding. He's scored, I think, 12 goals now. A few assists chucked in there as well. He's the one, and he's the one that Sunderland look to. If they can't find a way, then what they do is give the ball to Jack Clarke out wide on the left, and he can usually cut in or get around the outside and produce crosses. He's proved himself to be an absolutely terrific signing, arriving from Spurs. He's been the star of the show. There are other people involved too. Of course, it's not a one-man team. As I mentioned to you earlier, I don't know whether he'll play in this game because he did limp off at Rotherham on Friday night. It's Patrick Roberts, phenomenally talented footballer, came from Manchester City. He's on the opposite side on the right flank. He's absolute wizard with the ball at his feet. He's somebody else that Newcastle would have to watch out for if he plays. And the one I think that when he starts makes the team tick is Alex Pritchard, an experienced older head. He's creative, he's brilliant at set pieces, and Sunderland just look a much better team when he's in the side.
No, it was Pritchard that scored a long-range effort against Preston, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Yeah, it was a long-range sort of dipping effort that Freddie Woodman, someone that Newcastle fans will know, couldn't get near to. It's a fabulous strike. That was his return to the starting lineup after a few games on the bench.
So a bit of a warning there for Newcastle, maybe not to back off. And of course, if Pat Roberts plays, he has played for Celtic, although I think that was maybe during the time Rangers were up and down the league, so I'm not sure if he's experienced in Old Firm derby, but he's a man who's obviously played for one of the biggest clubs in Europe. If you were talking, Eddie Howe, about the main strength of Sunderland, what would you be telling them?
Probably, as I mentioned there, it will be out on the flanks. Out on the flanks. Clark and if he plays Roberts, that's where Sunderland are at the best. Get the ball out wide. That seems to be their main route to goal. Of course, Sunderland's biggest problem, famously, has been that they've had so few goals from strikers this season. That's been a real bugbear. The duck was finally broken against Preston on New Year's Day, Nazari Rusin. But up to that point, in the 25 previous games, Sunderland's 4 strikers that they signed in the summer hadn't scored a goal between them. And so all the goals that Sunderland had scored had to come from elsewhere. Jack Clark leading the way, as I say, with a dozen goals. So for Sunderland to be where they are at this stage, with just 1 goal from their strikers, is quite an achievement in itself. But it shows that their wide players have really contributed, and been a part of it, and they are a good source of goals as well as service.
So would you say the lack of goals from their forward men is probably their biggest weakness then, or is there something else that Newcastle can exploit?
It certainly has been their biggest weakness. Now, I don't know. It depends whether you think that it's a good thing that Nazari Rusin has broken that in the last game or not. There's an argument, isn't there, that every game you don't score makes it more likely you're going to score in the next. I remember talking many years ago to Malcolm McDonald about that. So you might say, well, the longer the Barron run went on, the more Newcastle should be worried about it. Or does the fact that Nazari Rusin has got this goal mean that he'll come into this game, assuming he starts, as I would imagine he will? Does it mean that he comes in with a refreshed, renewed confidence and without that particular millstone around his neck? It's hard to know. It's like so many of these things with football, isn't it? You can put a case for and a case against. So yeah, it's very difficult to know exactly how that will pan out.
Well, from a Newcastle point of view, when we're talking strikers, frustratingly, but probably not surprisingly, Callum Wilson is out of this game, set to miss at least the next 2 games, which is massively frustrating, because this is the kind of game where he would just absolutely come into his own. And, you want your number 9 leading the line. As good as Alexander Isak is, I would have started Callum Wilson if fit. But again, we're talking about Wilson missing important games. And that's a conversation for another podcast. But in terms of Newcastle, James, is there a player that you think Sunderland, or yourself to begin with, is most looking forward to seeing or fearing might be a better question? Is there someone that stands out from a Newcastle point of view that you're thinking, oh, goodness me, he's the one that could turn this game in Newcastle's favour?
Well, I guess there are 2 that spring immediately to mind. I mean, one you've just mentioned, Alexander Isak. He obviously I don't get to see much of Newcastle, as you can appreciate, with being at games most of the time myself. But when I do see Newcastle on TV or on Match of the Day, he seems to be quite a firecracker up front. He can do wonderful things. He's not always the most consistent player, but there again, you can say that about so many forwards. That they can do wonderful things, but only the very, very best do it on a consistent basis. So I'm looking forward to seeing him live. And also Anthony Gordon has something as well. He's a very sort of typical left winger, often in and out of a game. But when he turns it on, he's really got something. It'll be quite fascinating to see on the same pitch him and Jack Clark. Obviously they'll be on opposite sides, but both left wingers. And it'd be interesting to see how they compare and which of the 2 of them has the greatest impact on the game. Will Kieran Trippier play? Do you know? Or
he's got a groin injury, and Eddie Howe wasn't committal on his return. He said he was unsure. So we wait and see. I mean, sometimes Eddie Howe says one thing and something else happens entirely. I mean, they'll be doing everything to get him back into the team. He hasn't had the best of form himself in recent weeks, but given the stature of the game, you would think he would be doing his utmost to be included. But again, you wouldn't want to rush him back if indeed it is a bad injury.
It's that matchup between him and Clark on that side will be quite fascinating, I think. Yeah.
Well, that would be the big question. What happens then? I mean, Tino Livramento play right back potentially, but then you've got the issue on the left-hand side. Dan Burn had a shocker, unfortunately, in the last game. So maybe you play Tino Livramento on the left and you bring Emil Crafton on the right if Trippier isn't fit. All the questions Eddie Howe has to answer. But Gordon, you mentioned there, wonderful cross against Liverpool for the Isak's goal, but he's looking tired, he's looking knackered, so that might play into Sunderland's hands. And just before I get your score prediction, James, I just want to ask you about, because I admit I don't know too much about Sunderland's squad, but in Newcastle's squad, Sean Longstaff, Dan Burn, Lewis Miley, players who understand, who've grown up watching this fixture and now are living their dream playing this fixture. Then you've got, like I said, Jamal Lascelles, who's been captain of Newcastle for many years. Paul Dummett's another one who knows what this game is all about. If Sunderland got those players in their squad who have kind of grown up watching this game and can tell the rest of the squad, this is why it means so much. This is why we have to go out and win on Saturday.
Yeah, so there are a couple of players in the Sunderland squad that are very much fall into that category. There's Dan Neil, of course, in central midfield, academy product, that's come through. He's now a key player in the side. I think he's, from off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure he's played every game he's been available this season. I think he might have missed one through suspension, but the rest of them, he started every game. He South Shields born, so he knows all about it. Boyhood Sunderland fan, so this will be a dream occasion for him to be involved in his first derby. He obviously knows exactly what it means, and he'll be drumming it into the other players from further afield and also from abroad, of course. And the other being the goalkeeper, Anthony Patterson, incredibly highly rated, been part of the England under-21 setup last season, albeit his age meant that you would think he would be too old to play for the under-21 team, but he fitted in the category at that time. Born in Washington, again, come through the academy. He's another one off the sort of Sunderland goalkeeper production line after Jordan Pickford. So he knows all about it too. His first derby is his first derby too. So he'll be another one. I'd say of the two of them, I'd say that Dan is the louder and more vocal presence in the dressing room. Anthony's more of a quiet guy, but they both understand what the fixture means. They've grown up. They've watched these sequence of games that we've been talking about. These 9 unbeaten games for Sunderland and the 6-6 wins. I don't know just how many of them, they were at, how many of those fixtures that they attended. But as Sunderland fans, I'm sure they will have seen some of them. And they'll have certainly been following the others.
Yeah, and I mean, it's important, isn't it, that you've got those players to get the message out to the rest of the squad, but also a bit of a challenge, you would imagine, for the likes of Patterson and Lewis Miley, and even an experienced player like Dan Burn, not to let emotions get the better of you, because this is the fixture. When you were starting out as a professional footballer, that you would have wanted to play as a boyhood Newcastle fan, a boyhood Sunderland fan. And it is an emotional day. Jordan Pickford is a prime example of sometimes letting the emotion get the better of him. And it's going to be interesting to see if everybody, those players, particularly, can keep the emotions in check.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we, gone through the derby build-up and heard manager or somebody talk about, playing the game and not the occasion? And that's very much the case. And I think that's why. Externally, Sunderland are trying to keep a low profile on the derby, keep a lid on things, not have players coming out shouting from the rooftops and this and that and the other. They want to keep it very focused. I'm sure that in house they've got their own approach, but externally they're keeping a lid on things, not building the game up into too big an occasion, because it's at the end. Ultimately, crucially, at the end of the day, it's a football match, and that's what matters. It's not the sort of the big occasion. It's fine for us as journalists to get wrapped up, and fans to get wrapped up in the occasion, but players need to remain focused on the football.
Go on then, James. Just tell me then, as someone who's covered so many derby games, first one in 1999, what does this fixture mean to you and to the region?
Wow. Yeah. Well, to me, it's a strange one for me because, as you well know, I'm not from the region. So, to that end, I don't have a dog in the fight insofar as I didn't grow up a Sunderland or a Newcastle fan. So I get to step back a little bit and see it a little bit more of a distance than others do. But it's just amazing to see how it takes over the whole region for a week or a fortnight. You think about the week-long build-up and then the week-long aftermath, of a derby. It takes over everything. It's all anybody talks to you about. Everywhere I go, when I go to the petrol station, when I go to the cafe for a coffee on a morning, whatever, all I ever get is, "Oh, derby's coming up. What do you think? What's going to happen? Who's going to play? Blah blah blah." It's everything, and it means so much to people. And just from my point of view, this, as I say, this will be my 27th derby game, and who knows how many, if any, I'll get to cover from here on in. And they're an immense pleasure and privilege to cover. They can be desperately disappointing, miserable occasions. I remember Sunderland losing 5-1 at St James's Park, which was a pretty dark day on Wayside. But then the counterbalance of the occasions such as the 2-1 in the pouring rain at St James's Park, the sequence of 6 wins, so they're such incredible occasions, and they're freighted with such importance and such memories. They really are fabulous occasions, and it's, as I say, it's a real privilege to be part of, and I think I really appreciate it because I am one half a step removed from it. I mean, I've got family and friends who are mad keen Sunderland fans, so I certainly get it secondhand. Don't worry, I'm not sitting here thinking, "Oh, it's just another game, it's just another 3 points," because I absolutely know it's not. But yeah, I would feel a fraud if I said that I feel it in the same way that someone who grew up a Sunderland or a Newcastle fan did, because I just don't think that you can have the same feeling. But I think it's probably the next best thing.
How is it going to go then on Saturday? What is your score prediction?
Well, I absolutely hate giving score predictions, Moses, as I'm sure I've said to you many times in the past. So I think the only prediction that I intend to make is that neither Sunderland nor Newcastle will win the FA Cup. I'll leave it at that.
I'll let you have that one, James. Thank you very much for popping onto the podcast and providing the insight into Sunderland ahead of that FA Cup tie against Newcastle on Saturday. To you guys watching, please hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. To you guys listening, please follow the podcast. Leave us a rating and review as well. And head over to chroniclelive.co.uk, where we will have both press conferences from both managers ahead of the big game on Saturday. And we'll have our live match coverage on Saturday through our dedicated match blogs as well. Thank you very much for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your week.